Welcome back to the Disciplined Life Podcast, the place where we talk all about power differential relationships and domestic discipline. I'm Arya, and this is my husband, Coda.
Hello, everyone.
And before we get into today's topic, I just wanted to thank everyone for your support on YouTube and Patreon.
Yay, yeah, we've been excited.
Your support really does mean a lot to the channel and to us, and we really appreciate you guys for listening in and joining us over on Patreon.
It's been exciting to see. We just, really appreciate the support. We're glad you guys are getting good content.
So if you are listening to us on YouTube and you are not yet, please do subscribe and click the bell for notifications of when we upload a podcast. And if you want to find our Patreon link, it's in the description box. Like the video if you like it, and let us know in the comments what you think about the topic.
And suggest topics. We take topic suggestions there too.
So on today's episode, we are going to be talking all about the role of communication in domestic discipline.
It's if you all remember in our episode when we talked about our first pillar of trust, this is our second pillar, communication.
Yes. So communication is one of those very vitally important aspects of a successful dynamic.
You know, and I think it's one of those things that people might be asking themselves, this seems like an obvious topic, but really it's because big deal, we communicate every day. What's the big deal about communication? But hopefully this is something that we realize that it's not as something to just jump over like you would want to.
Well, every successful relationship out there, whether it's domestic discipline or not, does require communication.
Absolutely.
But when you have a power differential relationship, especially one that includes a discipline dynamic, communication becomes even more important.
That's so true. So true. And so I just wanted to bring that up because hopefully not, but if someone was saying, wow, that communication, that just kind of seems very obvious. Actually, no, that's one reason we wanted to do that, because we think this is very, very important to this kind of a relationship.
Well, and when we were talking about the pillars, I really think of pillars. When I think of a pillar, I think of like one of those ancient Greek buildings with
me too.
where you have the floor and then you have the pillars that are holding up the structure of the entire building.
Yeah, that's right.
Even though communication feels really obvious, it really is one of those foundational pillars that holds up the entire relationship. And that's why we wanted to talk about it.
Yeah. And many of you may be saying already, hopefully by the end of this podcast, maybe you'll say, if you've been having trouble in your relationship, maybe this is the one that you can go, maybe this is the area we're having trouble in, is communication. And that'll fix everything else, the other problems that we've been having. For sure.
So now that we've kind of established why we wanted to talk about this topic of communication, why don't we kind of talk about how communication can either contribute to the success or the lack of communication can contribute to the kind of disintegration of your dynamic.
Well, how far back do we want to go in our relationship? No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, we've kind of talked about it all at this point, right?
Right. Well, hopefully not. Hopefully we still got something to give them.
Well, no, I mean, we've talked about from the very beginning. So you can go as far back as you feel is relevant to the conversation.
Right. Well, we've talked a lot about obviously when we first started, so I won't go that far back. But I think that there are times where I know that I feel like that I'm being clear, but I'm really not. And so what I mean by that is there's a lot of things that Arya will tell you that I'll say in my head that I think I said out loud, and then I'm like, well, I said that. Didn't you hear me say that? No, I didn't. And I realized I said that in my head. I didn't actually say that out loud. So where I'm trying to get better is verbally communicating. Maybe she'll say I've gone too far the other direction. I'm interested to see what she has to say. But I'm trying to get better about saying more out loud about the things that we need to communicate and doing a better job of not assuming anything, but talking to her more about things.
Well, and one thing that I would say that I appreciate more often is that direct communication. Like, I don't need, and I don't know if this is just a trait about myself
Right.
or if this is something that can translate to a vast majority of others. But I appreciate when you use very direct communication. I don't need
Oh,
to know like the whole backstory. All I need to
right.
know is, what do you want me to do right now?
Now that can we park there just a minute because I appreciate that, but I was not good at that at first.
I would
Wouldn't you
say,
say? Because
yeah,
I gave you the
definitely.
whole story. Because I had always been told this is going to sound funny that women want the whole backstory, but that's not necessarily true with every single woman.
It's definitely not true with
I
me.
was good, and you're just like, give me the facts, get to the point, basically.
I mean, there are times where I need relevant
Backstory,
backstory
right?
or just connotation to what you're saying.
Sure,
But for the majority, it's like, I just need to know what you want from me
right,
right now.
right. And so I appreciate that because that is something that I've been trying to do a lot. Is just the facts, please. Give that to you. Unless, again, like you said, you need the backstory, but I was in a habit of always giving the backstory, and it wasn't necessarily needed.
And I think because you have a history of teaching and
Yeah,
the your role as a teacher and your role as a leader at work, you're used to over explaining things, because in those situations you really do have to kind of win over the oh
the person that you're talking to, or
right, yeah, you kind of have to win them over in order to get compliance.
yes, and also sometimes you're right. It takes a little bit more explanation to get them to achieve what I'm trying to get them to achieve.
Where I'm like, you don't
Yeah.
have to do that with me. You're literally in a position just to tell me what to do and I will do it. That's not to say that I don't have questions
Sure,
sometimes
right.
and that I shouldn't be allowed or expected to not ask questions. I should
Sure,
have that
sure,
option available.
right.
But there are times where I'm like, just tell me what to do.
And I will say that's something that maybe it's surprising for the folks listening at this point. Maybe it's not, but for me, that has taken a little bit of a learning curve too, to be able to say, "Oh, wait, I am in a position of authority here, so I can just say, hey, do this." Now, it's not that I'm barking out orders either. We've talked about this a lot, where it's not that I come in and go, "All right, Aria, you better X, Y, and Z." But I do have the authority to say, "Hey, I need you to do this."
Right. And there have been times where you're trying to give me options, or you're saying, hey, what do you want to do? We can do this, we can do that. And I've literally had to just tell you, like, I just need, what I want right now is for you to tell me what to do,
Right,
or
right,
what we're doing, or what the plan is. I don't want collaboration right now.
right. Exactly,
Um,
exactly.
and so that's part of it. Um, you know, I think that
And that has been just to park there for a minute. That has been something that we have had a lot of conversations about, because that has been a source of frustration for you in the past.
right, because sometimes it's just one of those things where it's like, I just need you to come in and be the authority and just kind of bring everything together.
And I will say, let me know if I'm going to rabbit hole here quick, but it's just something that just occurred to me, for those who are listening who are in a place of authority in this relationship. I want to stress that it's okay if this is hard at first, because I'm in a position right now in a few I'm in school, but I also have a job. And unfortunately, I'm in a position in my job right now where I'm really not in a position, I am not treated as the authority, even though I should be in the position that I'm in. And so, even though I'm a position of authority, I'm not allowed really to exert that authority. So, it is hard for me sometimes to change gears when I come home to remember that I am in a position of authority and I have the right to, is the word exude correct? Exude the authority. And again, I don't want that. It should not be a negative thing. But what I mean is if you're in that same position where maybe you're at a job where you're not necessarily the person in authority, or you are the person in authority, but no one's treating you that way. And in order to keep your job, you're having to play the political game a little bit. But then you come home and you have to try and turn that switch on. That's a hard thing to do. And I just want to give you encouragement. That's where communication comes in, because you need to talk to the other person and say, hey, I'm working on this, but here's how hard it is where I have to turn it off when I'm over here, and then I have to turn it on when I come back home.
And I think that that's one of the main things, is to be able to communicate where you're at and where your struggles are, so that there's proper alignment and expectations.
Right, exactly. No, and that's absolutely true. And that is something, without going too far back, that I'll admit that, and I don't know how you feel, Aria, but that is something that I will admit that I didn't do a very good job of at first. Again, it was maybe that assumption, oh, she'll just see, she'll just know. If I tell her about my day, she'll kind of put two and two together, but I didn't actually come out and say, hey, this is where I'm struggling. This is what's going on.
Right. And I mean, I was guilty of having some assumptions as well, because like we've referenced in past podcasts, when we were setting up our rules, we didn't really establish those ground rules of like honesty and respect and disobedience,
Right.
because I just assumed that that was a given. And then when I
Right.
was disrespectful to you and you didn't address it because you were like, well, we didn't talk about that, so I don't
Right.
feel like
Right.
I am in a position to hold her accountable for that. That became a source of frustration. So that's why communication is so important, because you really do have to get on the same page with all of these things.
Right.
You know, if you have earned a punishment, but your husband comes inside and is like, I have had the worst day at work. I do not have the physical, emotional, cognitive bandwidth to deal with punishment. You might have to wait.
Right.
That doesn't mean the punishment should be
Excluded or
right.
tossed out.
Or,
Yeah.
It should be still dealt with, but it might wait a day.
Right. Right. And we've done that before.
We have.
I mean, it took us a while to get to that point. Again, we had to communicate about that because that was a source of frustration at one point.
And I would say, like, it would be my suggestion to not make that the norm.
Absolutely. Yeah,
try. Deal with situations as they come up as quickly as possible.
Because
However,
then they don't linger. You don't want things to linger. But
right. However, there will be times where that has to happen.
Absolutely.
For one reason or another.
Yeah, make it, and I'm glad you brought that up. Try to make that the exception. Because, yeah, there are times I understand we come home from work and you've had 2 or 3 crappy days in a row, but try to gauge those in terms of don't use too many of your points there. And what I mean in trying to push stuff off, learn how to say, okay, is this like a 10 on the spectrum where I need to push stuff down, or is this more like a 5 or a 6? And if I come home and decompress a little bit, I can get through that.
And I would say to that is one area that if you were just to come in and you were to say like, hey, I know you've earned a punishment, but we're going to wait till tomorrow, that would confuse me. So that is an area where I need you to say, hey, I'm feeling kind of tired. I don't feel like I can go through that process.
Right.
in a productive way, so we're waiting till tomorrow.
Right.
That's all it would take, but I need a little bit more context than before. When just after I said I don't need context, now I'm saying I need context, but it is situational. It is situational, and so but an argument, well, I hate to say argument, but a point of frustration that we have had in the past is you come in and you're like, oh, she's earned a punishment, but I'm feeling tired, but I have to do this. This is all internal. Like, you're not saying this to me at all.
You're right. It's all internal.
And you're like, I'll just power on through and we'll just get it done. And then that punishment ends up not being productive and having a negative
interaction.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, negative fallout, because you weren't just honest in saying, hey, we're pushing this off until I can deal with it.
So exactly.
Hopefully that's within 1 or 2 days, but I mean, there might be a situation where you have to wait a week. It's not ideal, but
in fact, let me propose a question. This is a question, by the way, we didn't plan on this, so I want to throw this out. You're going to get
our podcasts really typically are not scripted at all.
Right.
We're really just kind of, we may have points that we touch on. So anyway, your question.
Well, because I want everybody to know, like, this is right off the top of your head. This is something I don't think we've even discussed before, but I thought it's good. Is there a point where you think because we haven't gotten to this point yet, I don't think so, but do you think there will ever come a point where you're like, okay, that's too much information, that's too much communication, too much information, I don't need that? I know we talked about where you said, get to the point, but even me coming in saying, because I don't know if I've gotten to the point yet where I'm still communicating enough, that's why I'm saying.
I would say, do you remember at the beginning of the year when I basically sat you down and said, hey, you're giving me too much communication, from the standpoint of you were coming home and you were like really telling me everything that happened at work and almost using that as like, using me as like a sounding board. And I just basically had to come to you and say, hey, that's actually hurting my ability to be soft and feminine, because I am becoming rigid and defensive on your behalf because of things going on at work that are frustrating to you. And so you're venting about them, and then I am getting offended on your behalf.
Right. It's making you angry and upset. Right.
And so I basically had to say, hey, can you protect me from that information? And if you have to go do, if you need to call a friend, or if you need to just take some time to decompress before you come home, if you need
really
to
like a punching bag, but I haven't been able to buy one yet. No.
I was about to say, we have a hook right there. You can hook one up.
In the studio. Yeah, that's right. No, I guess the other thing I should rephrase is, like, I don't know if I've done a good job yet. I'm getting better of communicating when maybe you've crossed the line on something.
I would agree with that. You have a hard time because I feel like
I'm getting better. It used to be worse, but I don't feel like I've arrived at that yet. Well, you're never going to arrive, but you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah, so. I would say that that's definitely a point that you could still improve in is communicating more in the moment. Yeah.
And this is the area that I was just talking about. This can be hard, and it kind of bearing my soul here for everybody. This can kind of be hard because at work right now, even though I'm supposed to be in a place of authority, I'm not allowed to exert that authority. So it is hard sometimes to put on that hat and then come home. Even though Ari and I have this relationship set up, we've talked about this. She's asked for it. Sometimes it's then hard for me to say, okay, I can say, no, that's not okay. You've crossed the line here, or you should have done this, you should have done that.
Being a little bit more directly dominant.
Yeah, right. Because where I am right now in my life, I am not allowed to do that.
Right, because at work you have authority, but you almost have to like do that mind game of convincing people to listen to your authority.
That's right. That's right. And the reason I'm bringing this up, and I think there's a lot of people listening that may be in the same place. And so there's this struggle that
honestly,
you go through.
unless you own your own business, and even then you can't be a jerk, or you're not going
Right,
to have
you're having
anybody
customers, yeah,
or
or
employees,
employees,
or and so most people do have to collaborate. And
yeah, and I'm not talking about like I'm glad you brought that up. I do not want anybody to think like I'm a tyrant and I got to have my way. I totally believe in being kind to your employees and your customers, but you know those moments as a boss or whatever where you have to pull someone aside, or you have to have those meetings and you have to say, hey, everybody, we're doing well in these areas, but we got to excel better in these areas. And you have those talks that can be really, really hard. But I'm in a position right now, my work, where I can't have those conversations. I'm not allowed to. So then it makes it really hard to come home and try to have those conversations.
Yeah. So
I just thought that was an important point to bring up.
That is an important point to bring up. I think that, do you have anything else from like the dominant husband side of communication that you want to touch on before shifting?
I think the only thing is that early on, I'm not so afraid anymore. Don't be afraid to talk to your spouse about where you're struggling in communication because you think that's going to make you look weak. I think that's where I was at. I was like, well, I'm supposed to be the person in charge. I can't talk to her where I'm struggling about trying to enforce the rules because then she's going to lose respect for me. No, it was the opposite. She was losing respect for me because I wasn't being honest where I was struggling and where I needed to help to do better. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I agree with that, because I would think, well, he's supposed to be enforcing these rules, and then when you wouldn't, or it wasn't enforced in the way we had maybe talked about or what I had in my mind, then I that's when I saw your leadership as being weak. Where if you would have said, hey, I'm kind of struggling with knowing the boundaries here.
Yeah.
I could have given you that reassurance to say,
Yeah. And I still struggle with that a little bit, but I'm getting better. And so that's what I would
absolutely.
say. But I would say don't be afraid. Have these conversations. You're not going to look weak. So, yeah, let's go on to the next.
Side, well, and on the flip side, I wanted to talk from the wife's perspective and talk about how communication, when you are the one in a position of submission, feels more difficult sometimes. I know for myself that when I need to communicate to you, I struggle sometimes knowing where my boundaries are and when I'm overstepping, because I don't want to come off disrespectful. That's my biggest concern with opening up and being more communicative, is knowing where those boundaries of communication versus I'm being reactive in my responses and it's coming off as disrespectful and sassy and that sort of thing.
And in your defense, I am getting better at letting you know that, but I'm still learning that.
True. But
so
that, I think that's my biggest struggle, is like, okay, because most of the time when I feel very strongly about something I need to communicate, it's because I'm having strong feelings, and I don't want my feelings to affect how I'm treating you, how I'm communicating, because rightfully so, those things should be addressed.
Correct.
They shouldn't be allowed to continue. And so I'm having a hard time. That's where I'm having a hard time even currently, is trying to figure out how to communicate in a way that, number one, I don't feel like I'm becoming too dominant. Like, you need to adhere to my opinion because I have these ideas and they're really good ideas and you should just do them, because that's not my position.
Right.
And then number two, I'm really frustrated and I need to communicate that I'm frustrated to you, and then it comes off as argumentative and disrespectful.
Right.
Or I'm really frustrated at life, and so I'm going to just take it all out on you, because,
Because life.
because of whatever reason in my head at the moment.
Right.
And so all of those things are, that's bad communication. It is a form of communication, but it's bad communication.
That's a good thing to point out. Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
I definitely think that one thing that has helped us is because in the past, you have had this concept that if you needed a moment, you could take that.
That's true.
However, you almost didn't allow me to have that because you're like, you're supposed to communicate with me. You're supposed to tell me everything. And I was like, there's some things, and I remember having this conversation with you where I'm like, there's some things that I don't feel like I should tell you. And you're like, no, you should tell me everything. I was like, no, because the unedited version in my head might not be the most productive.
Yeah, I remember when we had
It might get me in trouble sometimes if I tell you every thought that comes into my head as it comes in the tone that it is coming.
Right.
And so we had to come to an agreement that I was allowed to say, not right now, or give me a minute, or can we come back to this?
Yes.
Because there are times where you have to communicate things and you have to have hard conversations. You can't avoid the conversation, but you can say, let me gather my thoughts and come to a place where I can talk objectively, respectfully, and with purpose.
Right.
And not just be in a mode of being reactionary to the situation.
And by the way, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something we had a lot of communication about, and we talked. And I'm glad that we did because the only reason I was in that mindset of you got to tell me everything is I was in that form of communication and I just didn't want us to feel like we had secrets between each other. But when you said, "Look, I'm trying to be respectful because if I give you the unedited version." This is not going to be good.
Yeah, because it wasn't that I was trying to keep information from you. I was just trying to give myself a little bit of a filter to say, okay, what actually needs to be communicated here? What were just my feelings that I need to work through on my own?
Right.
Because it's not your responsibility as my husband to filter and process every single thought or emotion that I have.
No.
At some point I have to take some personal responsibility for that.
Yeah.
And so we just had to have that conversation. And so another thing that's really helped me, and I'm still developing this habit, so I am by no means an expert because this is really hard for me because I don't like when people self-diagnose things, but it would be very surprising to me if a professional did not agree that I have ADHD.
Right.
I have gone through all of, the education aspect of like learning about that, and I fit a lot of the criteria. And so it can be very hard for me to have the time management and also to have the concentration to do this. But I think one thing that I want to start doing more, that I've tried to start doing, is journaling.
Right.
Because that gives me the ability to either write stuff out in a way that makes sense and can be kind of filtered, and I can get all my thoughts out in one area, and then you can read it.
Right.
Or I can process through all my thoughts and be able to talk about it more productively.
Yeah. Right.
Journaling can help with both of those aspects. And again, it's not something
if
I'm
you're
very good at
journals, but but that's been good for you.
It has been. And even if you don't like writing, even to have like an audio journal where you just kind of talk through your process.
That's what I've been doing.
Talk through your
journal.
thoughts before actually addressing them with your partner. And I think that that can be the hard part about communication from the submissive side, is to say, at what point do I have to communicate? What point should I communicate? What needs to be communicated? And how can I do that without breaching rules or respect or...
That's very true. Yep.
Dynamic, because you're still in dynamic. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some couples that do take like a dynamic timeout during communication.
Yeah.
I would not suggest that in general. You might want to do that during negotiation.
Right.
When you're negotiating rules and consequences, you want to feel empowered to, abdicate for yourself, and you don't want to feel like there's a dynamical structure or power imbalance during those times. But general day-to-day communication, you should I would suggest, and what we do is we are still within dynamic during those conversations.
Yeah. Well, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, I felt like that was well said, especially
good
from your point of view.
So let's wrap up and kind of talk a little bit about how we communicate, like if we have any tips or pointers of things that we could add. I mean, I mentioned journaling.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to start with some of those?
So I would say that create an environment within your relationship where communication feels safe. Yeah, and what I mean by that
that's a good one. There
is, on the submissive side, I should not fear punishment every time I need to say something that is important in the relationship, even if it's something that I'm like, Coda's not going to be happy about this. For instance, our daughter's window, he was out in the studio doing some preparation for school or for work or so. I don't remember exactly what happened.
I was doing something.
But he was out in the studio, and it's detached from our house, so he had no idea what was going on inside, and our daughter's window was broken. Now, we do have a suspicion about how that happened, which was not the fault of our daughter.
No.
It was not my fault. It was no one's fault within our family.
But couldn't really prove anything, but we have an idea.
I was about to say, we have a suspicion, but we can't prove it, so we've just kind of moved on from that. But our daughter's window was broken, and so she calls out to me, and I look and I was like, oh my goodness, your window is shattered. And so I get it cleaned up the best I can, but then I come out and I'm like, oh man, I have to tell him, and this isn't good. Like, this is a frustrating situation.
Yeah.
And I should never have to fear punishment when I need to say something, even if it's something that is hard, or, even if it's something that like, hey, I don't like how you handled that. Yeah. I should not fear punishment just for having a thought, idea, or opinion or information that I need to communicate.
Agree. Absolutely.
And so create a culture within your relationship where communication is received well.
Yeah.
With parameters, obviously, if I'm like, I can say, hey, I really didn't like how you approached that, or I really didn't like how you handled that. That's different than, I can't believe you handled that way.
That's very true. Yep. Tone and how things are said. Vocal inflection.
Tone and attitude matters.
Yep. It matters.
Just as
on
much.
On both sides.
Yes.
By the way, both sides.
Just as much as the words that are being said, right?
Absolutely.
And so that would be my second tip, would be watch your tone, watch your attitude. Only communicate when you know that, number one, it's necessary, and number two, that you can do so in a productive way that does not undermine your dynamic roles.
Yes. Yeah.
It is hard to respect a husband or a man who is unhinged and angry.
Are you sure? You think?
And so if you are angry, if you are feeling really, a certain kind of way, do what you need to do to come down from that. If that's take a shower, if that's go for a run, take a walk, whatever it is.
Whatever your process is. Yeah.
Whatever you need to do in a healthy way. I wouldn't suggest doing things that, are unhealthy for you. Like, don't go out to the bar just because you need to decompress.
Yeah. Or get ice cream. No, I'm just kidding.
There's nothing wrong with ice cream.
I knew she would look at me with those, like, how dare you say that about ice cream?
But do what you need to do to decompress, to come back to the conversation. And on the submissive side, same thing. Like, if you cannot approach the conversation with a productive attitude and a respectful attitude, then take some time.
Yeah.
And again, if that means saying, if your husband comes to you and is like, we need to have this conversation and you're not ready yet, respectfully say, can I have some time? And if you're like, hey, can I take a shower?
Yeah.
Before we have this conversation, I just need to clear my head. Or if you're like, can I just walk around the block by myself just to have some quiet and clear my head before we talk?
Yeah. Yeah.
Try to figure out what you need and be able to say that respectfully. Now, I know for us, one thing that I've had to communicate outside of the heat of the moment is sometimes I cannot even say that respectfully. And so sometimes I just have to walk away and come back. And it's not because I'm being disrespectful. It's because I am trying to not be disrespectful.
Right.
But that's something I had to communicate and just say, hey, when I'm really, really, really worked up, sometimes I just need to walk away and have a minute. And we haven't really communicated about this, but maybe there's some sort of like signal or something that I can do in that moment that's maybe nonverbal that will communicate like, hey, I just need a minute.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that, but I don't know if that would be too much to talk about right now.
Probably, because I have no ideas,
maybe
and
we'll talk about that when the microphones are off.
I was gonna say I don't have any ideas right now, so that's something that I would have to ponder on before, and that would be the third tip. I'm just kind of flowing.
It's okay, go for it.
That would be my third tip: is go into conversations, especially when it's a problem that needs to be resolved. Try to go into the conversation with solutions. I learned this when I was working. I can't remember. Because I worked in childcare, so I was never in like the super corporate environment. But I'm pretty sure when I was working at public schools, because I worked at a public high school for the first few years of my working years, and we had mandatory training, like all school training days. And it was really crazy because like, the other departments, they're working with general ed. I was working with special ed. So our departments were very different in how they functioned. But I think it was in one of those trainings where they talked about how if you go into a meeting and all you do is point out the problems, that you're not going to have a productive meeting.
Right.
And how everyone's going to be frustrated and you're going to talk for 2 hours and you're not going to have any type of resolution at the end of that meeting if all you do is talk about your frustrations and your problems and pointing out things that don't work.
Right.
So I would say that translates into our relationship, because when it's like, hey, this, for instance, like having a rule around having the kitchen cleaned is stressing me out because I always do it, and having to remember to get into the app and click that off of my list without it clicking off a punishment is really like stress inducing, because I forget, because I go from cooking dinner, into cleaning up the kitchen, into the rest of our evening routine, and it's just not in the routine for me to get into the app and click it off. Can we? And so that's the problem, and it's okay to kind of acknowledge the problem, but then before I even said what the problem was, I already had an idea of a proposed solution. I was like, can we just take off the punishment?
Right.
So if I remember to click it off, then I can get a point for it. But if we take off the punishment, then it's not going to deduct anything from me. I don't have the stress of trying to avoid punishment. Because what was happening is I would be like, oh, I forgot to click it off. You would go in, you would fix it in the app because on your end, you can do that. But it was to the point where I was like, I was feeling like I somehow failed.
Right.
Even though I did what I was supposed to do,
right.
It was causing that kind of inner turmoil for me. And so, anyways, all that aside, going in with proposed solutions really does help communication flow better and more naturally. And it gives you not only, hey, here is the issue, here are some proposed solutions. Now let's talk about that and try to figure out something that works.
Yeah.
And it's your job as the husband, as the dominant partner, to make the decision. So if I'm like, here's the problem, here's my proposed solution, you're well within your right to be like, I don't think that that's a good solution. Here's what I propose. And then you can kind of negotiate from there.
Right, back and forth.
Do you have anything to add?
No, I was going to say, I think you covered a lot of it. I think the biggest thing that I kind of already covered it, but to kind of summarize for the husbands out there is, be as structured as you can be within. You don't want it to get so structured that it just becomes this chore for your wife, but be as structured. Don't be afraid, again, to talk, to let her know where you're struggling. Don't hold your feelings in, and do your very, very best to when you are communicating those feelings to be honest, but also be sensitive to her so that she doesn't feel like she's the problem. That's the biggest thing. Is I think I've done some things sometimes that made Aria feel like she's the problem, and that's not what you want to do. So I would say have that structure and be willing to do something that is hard for us guys, and that's maybe be a little vulnerable and talk about what you're going through.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah, that's a good one for both sides.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I'm the ultimate perfectionist, and so she knows this is hard for me.
But sometimes points of growth come from learning what doesn't work.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And don't think that because a mistake happened or a situation got rough that the dynamic is to blame. Right. You may find that this dynamic is not the right dynamic for you, but only you can decide that. But for us, even through the times where it's like, wow, that really didn't work and this feels really bad and we're going through this point of growth where things feel really difficult, we have pushed through that and persevered through that, because at the end of the day, we're like, okay, first of all, this dynamic, we need to give it a fair shot.
Yes.
So we don't want to throw it out until we have exhausted all avenues of possibility. And if none of those work, then maybe, then we can discuss if we're on the right track here.
Correct.
But also, we just did not want to give up this dynamic that we saw a lot of really good potential in just because we hit one road bump. We had one roadblock.
Aria will tell you, in our family, I say all the time, we don't quit things just because we have a little bump in the road and we have an issue. We pick ourselves up off the mat and we keep fighting, because those are the only two choices you have.
But it is okay if you're like, hey, we have been at this for 6 months, a year, and we've run into problem after problem after problem, it's okay to reassess and try to figure out if this is the right dynamic for you.
No, that's true.
We started out more in a DS dynamic on the, BDSM side of things. That didn't work for us.
Nope.
And so we had to do some more research and find something that did work for us. And that is how we found domestic discipline and started incorporating it. And
By the way, if you're needing help, reach out to us in the comments. Maybe this would be a good topic for the podcast if you feel like you're struggling in this area.
So,
or any area. Really.
I was about to say, you can reach out to us through the comments, or you can send us a DM directly on Instagram. Our email is listed in the description box. You feel free to send us a direct email. If you join us on Patreon, there is a option to message us there as well. So.
And just want to let everybody know that may be listening, the rumble that you're hearing, it got a little hot, so we turned on the fan. So there's nothing wrong with the recording, but there may be a little rumble, and I appreciate you. We were kind of dying. So
it is that time of year. We do live in the South.
Oh, yes. So any of you that live in hot areas, you know what we're talking about.
So thanks, guys, so much.
Thank you.
We enjoyed this. Do you have any resources that you have read or come across about communication in general? Like, have you read any books on communication that would be helpful?
A lot of the stuff that I gather, and this may sound kind of funny, but a lot of the stuff that I really put into our relationship that we were talking about is a lot of books that I've read that are in general communication for business or for running a business or teaching or anything like that, or how people learn.
I was about to say, a lot of the books out there on communication are going to be either relationship based or like general relationships or business.
Yeah.
I have never come across anything specifically for domestic discipline.
No. But I've gone on YouTube a lot and just.
So what are some books that you've read that you would suggest?
One of the ones that I love is by a woman named, now I just lost her name, but it's called The Way We Learn. Cynthia Tobias. There it is. The Way We Learn, Cynthia Tobias, because she talks a lot about the way people learn. And this is important because depending on how they learn, you want to communicate with them differently. Visual learners, kinesthetic learners, all that kind of stuff. I won't go into too much detail. There's some great books on leadership. There's one called Drive. I'm missing the author there. Really any leadership books. The Mentor Leader by Tony Dungy. There's a few. She knows I really like to read books by like sports coaches and stuff, but they talk a lot about a communication in books like this, and that has helped me communicate better, I think.
Any of the books that he referenced or any others that he may think of after this podcast is done, I will link in the description box.
Yes.
I will put Amazon links. We do not have, we are not part of the Amazon affiliate program, so we get absolutely no kickback.
No kickback. Oh, there's one that I'll mention, but I'll get the author to Aria so she can post it. The book that I've mentioned several times in the last few podcasts, The Tender Warrior. That is a really good book about how to communicate to your wife as husbands. It's really good. In fact, I lost my copy years ago. I could probably afford to get a copy and reread that book. It's a good book.
And if you do that, will you do a Patreon post reviewing the book?
Yeah, it'll probably be an audio post because I'm a terrible writer.
That's fine.
But yeah, I'm going to use the summer to try to get back on reading because I love to read, but I haven't had much time. But I need to force myself to at least read a chapter a night of a book. So yeah, maybe that'll get me off my duff to do that.
Anyway, guys, we really enjoyed having you here. If you like the video, please like it, and if you are not yet, please subscribe to the channel and join us on Patreon if you want to do that. Link is down in the description box.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.